What's Gucci, y'all? BRC in that house, aka B Red Cleffy, coming at you today with some Karakin tips and tricks. We're gonna start off with parachuting. How to parachute if you're having a difficult time doing it, with very simple explanation. We're not going to get into any type of meters when to jump, any type of kilometers on how fast you got to dive. We're just going to try to make it simple and as understandable as possible. We're going to talk about landing zones. If you like to fight, talk about how and where to land in cities for your play style. If you don't like a quick battle right off the rip, we're going to explain a smarter place to jump to avoid quick battles and last till the end game, and helpful tips in the middle of the game to have a good location to view the whole field and not get shot from all directions, and other little tips and tricks that may be obvious to the daily PUBG player but more helpful to the people who don't get to play PUBG as often as some of us. So let's get right into it. Parachuting seems so much harder and different than the other maps just because of how tiny this map is. So like I said, we're not going to talk about meters, kilometers of speed. We're going to make it simple as possible here. When you're paying attention to the altitude and the little white line of when your person actually pulls a chute, you always want to make sure you dive just before your altitude reaches that white line. Now, to make it so you dive a little bit farther down, make sure you're not above other mountainy terrain. The lower you are to the ground, the lower you'll dive down before your parachute actually deploys. A lot of people do think, yes, jumping a little bit earlier will get you to the spot earlier, but sometimes that's not the case. As you can see here, I jump really late just to prove it. I avoid the mountainy terrain, come in, and still am landing before these guys around me. The main thing you want to pay attention to is the terrain around your landing zone, and the actual jump of how early or when will affect it by too much, because some of these guys are going to pull their chute a little bit higher because of where the terrain is and the altitude of where they are. But if you work your way a little bit lower than them, you won't have to float as long and you'll get to the ground a little bit quicker. There are times when the plane path is going to make it hard, so you avoid that terrain, then avoid that landing zone. The easiest and best way to explain this without confusing any of you: it doesn't matter when you jump, as long as you're not super early or super late aiming for your destination. Avoid the high mountains, avoid the high rocky terrain, and do your best to fly over a low, flat surface. And just before you get to your landing zone, make sure you dive down with the left thumbstick, as you see here that I'm doing in my video, and then continue to dive straight down as your parachute shoots up and go to your marker. If you guys have any questions, feel free to ask. I know it seems like this is a little wonky, but it's just because it's different from what you're used to. I'm not diving any different. My routine is just a little bit shorter because of how small the map is, and I'm making sure I get a little bit lower by avoiding the high rocky mountain terrain. This parachuting tip slides right on over to my next tip, which is landing zone. With my playstyle, I like to land quick, grab a gun, and take a couple people out around me to lessen the battlefield. So I like to land in the open garage door buildings where I don't have to open other doors and waste time. I see the loot, it's open space, grab and go. I make things quick, I grab and go, reload, and take some people out. That's what I like to do. Now, for those who don't like to battle right off the rip, but do like to land into the cities and get some gunfights a little bit after they land in the big 5-story buildings. Loot them up, take advantage of the high ground, listen to your surroundings. That way you have a wide view of the field and of the buildings around you, and you could also listen and hear people around. That way, if you're not confident enough running around, you could play the windows, peek from the buildings, jump from story to story, use the balconies to your advantage. The 5-story buildings are really helpful as well, because you could get looted up really nicely in those and feel a little more confident. Even if you don't like to push people, you could play the defensive side, have some good loot. That way, if you do get shot at, you'll probably have some healing items and be confident for the next people to either rush you or you to rush them. Get used to these cities, get your routine going for where you land and where you go. That way you never have to think about it and you're already used to it. It's going to take some time getting used to these cities and the layouts of the buildings, but if you make a routine in one area, it's going to help big time. Then once you get used to it, then move on to the next city. Get used to that one. It's not going to be easy, but it'll be helpful. For those of us that don't like to fight right off the rip, that would prefer to get looted up and have a relaxing start, then land more on the edge of Karakin. Loot little compound to compound and slowly make your way into the zone. That's the easiest way to stay alive, get looted up fairly well, and feel confident with your loot to survive longer into the game. Sliding on over to the loot. Bandages are going to be decreased, but first aids and boosters are going to have an increase. Yeah, it's nice to have some bandages on you, but later on in the games, try to have as many first aids as possible. Don't waste your time trying to bandage. Why do I say that? Because after you get in fights, why do you want to spend 15 seconds bandaging? Just use a first aid. That way you could get out of dodge quicker. The longer you bandage, the longer you're vulnerable for a third-party shot from the distance. Just use that first aid. It doesn't matter how many you have. Loot the body you killed and hope they have more first aids. Don't waste your time bandaging up out in the open spaces. Get that quick first aid off. This takes me right over to throwables. Now, we all know there's no frag grenades on this map. Mollies, pick them up. Stuns, pick them up. Don't know how to use them? Practice, learn how. These things are going to be huge throughout the whole game of Karakin. Throwables are a big factor when it comes to one-on-one battles and trying to take someone out quick, especially when both of you are hiding behind cover. You want to take other people out quick so you don't get third-partied. And I recommend don't waste your time throwing sticky bombs. Unless you throw a couple and you know you can make the other person skedaddle from their cover so you could take them out. But if the cover's too large and you don't plan on pushing as you throw your sticky bombs, then I think they're useless. Sticky bombs help to make a man leave from his cover. They help make loud noises so you could push into buildings. And obviously they help you get into tunnels. But in my opinion, I don't think they help you like how a frag would, because it's very hard to throw them far and it takes them forever to blow up. Now, sliding on over to weapon of choice. For your primary, I say run whatever's comfortable for you. But for the secondary, I don't recommend bolties. Now, as satisfying as they are to hit those bangers, it is always fun. And I'm not saying you shouldn't. I just don't recommend it. As well as DMRs, I don't really recommend DMRs either in this map. I feel like the better bet is to run something as your primary with the red dot. And if you're good at switching scopes, then go ahead and grab a DMR bolty. But if you're not great at switching scopes, I almost want to say run another comfortable weapon that you like to use with a scope on it and use that as a full auto or single tap gun. That way when you get in close encounters and you potato and waste your full clip missing somebody, you're able to pull out your secondary gun and give yourself a second chance and possibly survive that fight. I'm not saying do this. Use whatever you want to have fun. I'm just recommending that this is the better bet for Karakin, because most fights end up being close quarters anyway. Now some in-map tips and tricks. It used to be huge to go into the tunnels because there was always better loot. Grab the C4s and get in those tunnels. Now it's not as mandatory. There's really good loot all around in the map, so you don't have to worry about going down there. It's basically a death trap anyway, because you never know who's down there waiting for you, so they could third-person peek you. So I just recommend to stay away from those because they're not as necessary as before with recent updates. But if you do like entering the tunnels, remember, the bunkers with the red flag on them, you could enter those. The bunkers with no red flag have no entrance to them. They're just a bunker that you could enter and feel safe inside. Another huge tip I recommend is not to worry about blue zone so much. Pay attention to where the zone rotates to, so you're aware of when you need to leave. But don't worry about being in blue zone and taking damage to it, because it doesn't deal a huge amount of damage. And now that boosts and first aids have been increased, you really won't have to worry about it. So don't be too concerned to be stuck out in blue, unless you're low on meds, of course. And for those of you that like to stay ahead of blue, pay attention to late bloomers coming into the circle from blue. Last tip I have for Karakin: take advantage of high ground. Use those high hills. It's much harder for someone to run up to you and take you out, especially in third person, because you could see them clear as day. But don't choose one with no rocks, so you could have a little safe spot to heal up in. Find one with multiple rocks, that way you could hide from all angles and not be shot at, and still have nice views in the field around you. And that's it for today's tips and tricks for Karakin. Hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, hit that like button, sub to the channel if you haven't already, and make sure you hit the bell for a little ring-a-ding-ding to get notified when the next video of mine goes live. Catch you on the next one. Peace.